long time ago. All right, so Article 4, whether the Roman Church is Catholic. So we've already seen the characteristics of the Church of Christ from sacred scripture, etc. And now we're applying them to the Catholic Church, whether these things are found in the Catholic Church. That's the process of apologetics, as proving that the Church is the true Church. So the adversaries, the heretics, are accustomed to call us by diverse names. Sure. But the ancient name of Catholic no one has been able to snatch away from the Roman Church. So remember that St. Ignatius of Antioch was the first to use it. And it has always been used. St. Augustine uses it all the time. The Catholic Church, meaning the universal church. So it is a very ancient name of authentic Christianity. Whether they like it or not, St. Augustine says, those heretics and schismatics, not when they speak among themselves, but when they speak with others, call the Catholic Church by no other name than Catholic. And that's true. For they could not be understood unless they distinguish it by this name, by which it is called by the whole world. There were some who seceded from the root of unity, yet wanted to be called Catholic, but there is only one group, according to Passianus, which is permitted to call Catholic. Christian is my first name, but Catholic is my last name. Famous quote. Nor were there lacking those who completely altered the notion of Catholicity in order that they might claim for themselves their non-Catholic and their non-Catholic groups the mark of Catholicity which they denied to the Roman Church. For example, from the fact that there is prevalent today certain doctrines of humanity among modern rulers, and that it penetrates the laws of many people. They say that the expansion of their religion should be measured by this. But the weight and authority of the true church is not to be measured by human judgment, but according to the precepts of Christ. Lest I say too much about this matter, I will say one thing. Many of the most noble good things which are contained in the vague word of humanity, alas, mixed up with evil things. So this is written around 1900. Were propagated by the church without any of the evils which are today preached that couldn't be right. Preached by the church. Were propagated by the church without any of the evils and are today preached by the church. All right, so in other words, anything that is in humanism that is, let's say, at least naturally good, has always been preached by the church, like fraternal charity, for example. Or treating your neighbor with justice. That has always been preached by the church. But this propagation alone does not constitute Catholicity, nor does Catholicity disappear if they do not understand who manage the government of nations, or if they who rule on the earth refuse to be informed. For this reason, one should recall what we have said above concerning the character of Catholicity in order to truly understand the thesis. So the Roman Church is Catholic. Argument, that thing is Catholic, which is everywhere one, but the Roman Church is everywhere one. Therefore, it is Catholic. Proof of the minor, it is one, as we have proved above. It is everywhere morally, but not physically, for one, from nearly the beginning of the preaching in all of the parts of the known world to which they were able to go, the church engendered faithful for Christ, and in our time its sound has gone forth into the 5 parts of the world. So by the time of 1900, it was practically everywhere. 2, it is so numerous that we see that it is truly, although morally, founded on the whole earth, not only dispersed here and there. So everywhere on earth you can find Catholics. Argument 2, Catholicity corresponds to the mandate of Christ saying, "Going therefore teach ye all nations," but that mandate has been fulfilled in an outstanding manner in the Roman Church. Therefore, the Roman Church is most rightly called Catholic. The Roman Church, although very often disturbed by persecutions, is expanded every day and has far exceeded in number all the sects. According to the most recent statistics, now this is around 1900, which are worthy of belief, among those who call themselves Christians, 270 million pertain to the Catholic Church, 110 million belong to the schismatic churches, including many dissenting churches, and to the approximately 150 Protestant sects, 167 million. See, so again, those are, Protestantism is a generality. It's not a unity. You couldn't say that has Catholicity. It's just an umbrella for people who hate the Catholic Church. And the schismatic churches, there's many schismatic churches. So you're again talking about a generality there, not a true any kind of real Catholicism. The Roman Church brought all of Europe before the Lutheran rebellion to the Christian life and faith. In other parts of the world, the Roman Church also alone bore the burden of the day and the heats, and practically alone did it prepare the way of the Lord in the rough lands of the Gentiles and the barbarians. So it is true that the Catholic Church's missionary activity far exceeded anybody else's. Whatever is to be found of the positive Christian religion among non-Catholics is in them as sacred relics of that faith, as it were, which we held in common with their fathers. So, in other words, anything that is in a non-Catholic religion that is true is either borrowed, Cardinal Mazzella would say, stolen from the Catholic Church, let's say taken from the Catholic Church, some doctrine, practice, anything that's true in it, or from natural religion, what you can learn about God by reason. So, yes, you do find certain truths in non-Catholic religions, but they come either from the Catholic Church or they come from natural religion. But there's a great deal of falsehood. The Roman Church alone can glory in such excellent preachers of the gospel and the wondrous fruits of this preaching as we admire in the lives of St. Vincent Ferrer, St. Louis Bertrand, St. Francis Xavier, Blessed John of Brito. Monuments of Catholicity are the Roman Propaganda, that means the Congregation de Propaganda Fide. And by the way, that word was taken into secular use and applied to the government by none other than Goebbels. He had a department or ministry of propaganda. He was a Catholic. He was raised a Catholic in the Rhineland. He hated the Catholic Church. He was a communist. But he took that because he thought that's a great word. So it's obviously from Latin, propaganda, things that should be propagated. And so he was the one that coined it as in the common use today for government information that is usually false, propaganda. But his parents were pious Catholics. Goebbels. The propaganda, the institute, which is called the Propagation of the Faith in France. So there was a missionary society in France and others. Books which are entitled Annales de la Propagation de la Foi, Annals of the Propagation of the Faith, or Annales Propagandae Fidei, and the Lives of the Apostolic Men, confirm that the Roman Church is the nurse of the faith in the entire world. For this is the Church of Christ, for there the Lord hath commanded blessing and life forevermore. Objections. There are some people who knew the Roman Church only after many centuries, therefore the Roman Church was not always Catholic. So the idea is that it didn't get everywhere right away. It took many centuries. I distinguish the antecedent, that there were people of this type in the unknown world, let it pass. In the known world I subdistinguish, and this proves that there was no metaphysical Catholicity, I concede. Moral, I deny. The founder of the church established preachers of the gospel and not discoverers of regions, but rather preachers to those regions which were already discovered. So South America, North America, it was not even known until around 1400. Well, even almost 1500. For this reason, it is not repugnant to Catholicism that before Columbus, the gospel had not been preached to the peoples of America. But the church never stopped enlarging the place of its tent in those regions which were known. If Tertullian already in his time did not hesitate to assert concerning Christ, he reigns everywhere and is adored everywhere. Indeed, the church of today is so strong in numbers and extension that, morally speaking, it is contained by no limitations of region. So the immediately as the New World was discovered, the church was expanding into the New World. Also in the Far East, as the Portuguese, for example, went to the places like what is now Indonesia and China. The church wasted no time in getting to those places. I mean, St. Francis Xavier went to all of those places, and the Spanish missionaries came to South America, and they wasted no time. When the Spanish arrived, the first thing they would do is say Mass. Like they would dock their ships someplace. The first thing they would do was set up a tent. Of course, a tent gives you jurisdiction. Set up a tent, and they would have all of the articles of Mass. They would have priests, and they would have Mass first. That was instance. The Catholicity of the Roman Church is not a fixed fact, since it has fluctuated a great deal. When the religion of Mohammed overtook a great part of Christianity, when Photius split from Rome, when the reformers of the 16th century snatched away many nations from it. Besides, in the 20th century, there is not found either in Asia or in Africa a great multitude of Catholics. Therefore, Catholicity does not pertain to the Roman Church. Response: I distinguish the consequent. A mathematical Catholicity does not pertain to the Roman Church, I concede. A moral Catholicity I deny. We have already described the nature of the mark of Catholicity from the statements of Christ, and from every nature of the thing. According to this concept, Catholicity must be looked at in a dynamic way as well. The power of Christ, which inheres in the church, does not exclude great calamities, which Christ himself predicted for his church. See, so that people fall away from the church does not take away from the Catholicity of the church. They were originally evangelized. If they fall away, that's their problem. But the Catholic Church was there. Nor is the supreme or definitive effect of this supernatural power determined to a time, but always continues the temple of the church among great ruins in her unity, preserving the admirable work of restoration and amplification in such a way that this axiom, ubique unum, everywhere one thing, must which must be present in a certain group without interruption is safely recognized. So the church has made, even in those cases of Mohammedan countries and schismatic countries, has made every effort it could to gain converts back to the Catholic Church. Many times it was impeded. Most of the time it was from doing so. But, for example, the Eastern rites are all ex-schismatics. I don't know if you know that. They came back from schism, all of the Eastern rites. For this reason, when the Donatists showed to the Catholics the many barbarian peoples who had not yet been converted to Christ, or the many heresies which were alien to the communion of Catholic society, St. Augustine showed the Church how, by growing, it does not cease to be fruitful until the end comes, when it has been preached to all men. See, that's one of the conditions of the second coming, is that the gospel has been preached to the whole world. Notice that it does not cease to be fruitful until the end comes, when it has been preached to all men. Also, in Epistle 199:47, he says, "The church grows in the whole world, for it still has that by which it grows, until the prophecy of Solomon is fulfilled, which was said of Christ, he shall reign from sea to sea, and from the river all the way to the ends of the earth." Objection 2. The charism of preaching is not proper to the Roman Church. Therefore, the intimate cause of Catholicity cannot be proved from it. Proof of the antecedent. The missionaries of the Protestants have spread the gospel over the whole world. The vast empire of the Russians has learned the faith of Christ from the Phocians. Response. I distinguish the antecedent. The charism of preaching is not proper to the Roman Church. Materially, I concede. Formally, I deny. The distinction is evident from those things which we have discussed above. However, I respond to the proofs. Concerning what is said of the Protestants, I deny. Despite whatever the missionaries of the Protestants and the biblical societies have done, there is lacking to them unity, and when unity is removed, Catholicity cannot even be thought of. Very important point. If you don't have unity of faith, you can't have Catholicity. So those two marks crash with regard to the Novus Ordo. They have no unity. The only unity they have is organizational unity. But, as I just said in my December newsletter, which General Motors can claim organizational unity. And a certain Catholicity there in a lot of countries, a Coca-Cola, which is everywhere. So it has organizational unity. They're centered in Atlanta, Georgia. I mean, that is not sufficient. There has to be a unity of faith and a unity of worship. And there is no unity of faith in the... And that unity of faith has to be constant. In other words, not only horizontal, that is, where everyone believes the same thing, but also vertical in the sense that you believe the same thing as your Catholic ancestors. It has to be one tremendous unity. Otherwise, it's not Catholic. So those two, right off the bat, are lacking to the Novus Ordo. So the unity, the organizational unity of the Novus Ordo just doesn't suffice. The Lutheran Church has organizational unity. They call it the Episcopalians have the Ecclesia, the Episcopal Church of the United States of America, or something like that. They have some organizational unity. It's not hard to have organizational unity. You could have a bridge club that has organizational unity, where the ladies come together and play cards once a week. That's a purely material thing in that sense. And it's not apostolic, obviously, because they deny apostolic doctrines. And it's not holy. I mean, where do we begin? But even if we set aside all of the, let's say, the peccadillos of the clergy, it's a Spanish word. It's come into English as peccadillo. I'm being sarcastic. And if we set aside that, but even its doctrines are not holy. In other words, it is especially the joy of adultery, that the document Adulterii Laetitia by Bergoglio. I'm being sarcastic again. It's Amoris Laetitia, but in it he sanctions adultery, so it's really the joy of adultery, and other things that the giving of Holy Communion to non-Catholics, which is a sacrilege, and other things that are officially all the ecumenical meetings and the general doctrine of ecumenism is unholy. It's against the unity of the Church. So the Novus Ordo has none of the marks of the Catholic Church. So I will pass over, but that's a very important point, that when unity is removed, Catholicity cannot even be thought of. I will pass over in silence those things which have been said concerning the relative sterility of the missions and of the character of the Protestant apostolate. In what concerns the conversion of the Russians, I also deny, for the greatest part of the Russians were taught the Christian faith from the years 857 to 1015, especially under the reign of Vladimir, who reigned from 980 to 1015. So Byzantium was all uniate at that point. And they sent the missionaries into Russia. And so it was all uniate, meaning Catholic. In this time, the union of the Russians with the Roman See had not been broken. Besides, the charism of preaching does not consist in the mere fact that opinions are propagated in this or that nation. The Russian Church is nothing outside of Russia, and within Russia it is propagated by the whip and corruption. For it is evident to all that from the year 1772, the principal preachers of the gospel were Catherine II. We won't even speak about her. She's a filthy pig. Would not be it would be too kind. Let's put it that way. Nicholas I, who persecuted the Catholic Church, but who did come to see Gregory XVI. Do you know that? Nicholas I. And Alexander II, he was the one that was assassinated, of whom Zimashko and Popiel were the cruel mercenaries. So the Tsars persecuted the Catholic Church, particularly in Poland, and that was Nicholas I carried on a vigorous repression of Catholicism in Poland, and the Poles rose up against them, and that's where Gregory XVI said, despite the fact that you're being persecuted, you can't rise up against the government. So. That was the 1830s. Instance, Roman excludes Catholic because Catholicity is restricted to the word Roman. I respond by distinguishing Roman explains Catholicity, I concede, restricts it, I deny. In fact, that thing is said to be Catholic, which is everywhere one. Therefore, it is required for Catholicity, in the same way that there is for a circle, that there be a center and a circumference. See, so Roman is not like Italian or, Romanian or, Lithuanian. It is the center of unity. It is not a center of ethnicity. And that's why Latin is so important, because it is symbolic of the fact that it is the living language of an unchanging church. See, it is the language of the Catholic Church. The official the Catholic Church doesn't speak in its officialdom in any language but what is its own. Now, yes, it can approve translations so that people understand them, but it's very important that that be maintained and that its liturgy also be in its official language. It's one of the reasons for Latin. It is, you get these documents like Traditionis Custodes, laugh out loud, which starts out with that title and then goes into Italian. It's all in Italian. Obviously, because probably no one in the Vatican knows anything else but Italian. So now it's the Italian church. It's an insult that that should be in Italian. Now, if you were writing to the Italian bishops, perhaps, all right, you put it, which was done by various, or the French bishops or something like that, you put it in French, like Notre Charge Apostolique, which was given to France. It's too bad that wasn't out in Latin, though, because it is a absolutely important document, and it'd have more universality if it were in Latin. But but if you have something that is meant for the universal church, to put it in some language that belongs to, one part of the world is it's an insult. Therefore, the term Roman Catholic is the most explicit expression of Catholicity itself and is absolutely true. And that's why, as I said, the popes insisted on having their own Catholic state so as not to be the part of any other state, any worldly state. That's why you have the Vatican City state. Yes?
What is it again? What is the fundamental distinction between the moral expansion and the real expansion, metaphysical expansion?
The moral means that the Catholic Church has the, you might say, the energy and intention to expand. See, metaphysical would be, in fact, it's everywhere. See, so when the apostles went out, they went as far east as India. They went as far west as Spain. And that was pretty much the extension of the known world. The Romans knew something about China. Right? There was some notion that there was something there, but pretty much the known world was as far as Alexander went. Yes, there was Russia, but I mean, it was mostly forests where people were running barefoot, for example. I mean, Russia was just a cold tundra at that time. I mean, it was hardly populated, and it was not a. Yeah, I mean, and even northern Germany, the German tribes in the north. I mean, the church eventually got there. It's just that the original force was into all of the civilized known world. But the church wasted no time in getting into the barbaric parts of Europe. The Germans were worshiping trees, and the Druids in Ireland, and and in England too. Wasted no time at all. And so it has that intention and energy to do that. That's the idea of moral. So when a new place is discovered, then eventually and quickly the church gets there. Seeks to get there. May not. In other words, if the English don't want to take them on their ships, or which they would never do, but in other words, if the English kick them out or something like that, if the English burned all the Spanish Franciscan monasteries in Florida, the missions, when they took over St. Augustine, they went down the Suwannee River, which is north of here, that flows into the Gulf of Mexico from the area around St. Augustine, and there was a whole series of Franciscan missions. They, one by one, burned them all. The English have been the enemy of the Catholic Church for many, many centuries. The most vigorous enemy of the Catholic Church is the English. So, so that's what is meant by that. In other words, is the Catholic Church in the South Pole? I mean, no, it didn't get to the South Pole until somebody discovered it. I mean, I'm sure if there were people that wanted the Mass in the South Pole, the Church would send well, maybe you could volunteer for it. There is no place on the earth that the Church does not want to be and intend to be. That's what that means. All right. Article 5, whether the Roman Church is apostolic. The adversaries prefer nothing more than to attack the apostolicity of the Catholic Church. In fact, many of them have lost the true concept of apostolicity. It may be seen, therefore, whether the Roman Church is marked by that apostolicity which we described above. Dogmatic theologians confirm the apostolic origins of each of the dogmas of the testimony by the testimony of the fathers. So you see, that's apostolicity with regard to doctrine. All right. We must prove, however, by certain evident and public facts that the apostles, the messengers of Christ, were the founders of the Roman Church. To the Roman Church belong all those who have remained in the root with the See of Peter. Protestants, Luther, Calvin, and unbelievers, Renan, Réville, Harnack, contend that the origins of the Christian religion and the Church of Rome are very different. Against these, we propose the following thesis. And you can find out who Ernest Renan is. He was an apostate. He was a Catholic apostate and denied the divinity of Christ. Lived in France, mid-19th century. So the Roman Church is apostolic. Argument 1, for apostolicity it is required, A, that there be public, legitimate, and uninterrupted succession. All right, very important point. And B, an identity of doctrine, sacraments, and government. There's your definition of it. And all these things are found in the Roman Church, therefore the Roman Church is apostolic. Public, legitimate, and uninterrupted succession is evident from the public fact that the Roman pontiffs have succeeded St. Peter in the See of Rome. No one would deny that, even the adversaries. We will prove this below when we treat of the primacy of the Roman pontiff. St. Augustine admonishes us, saying, "The consent of peoples and nations keeps me in the Church. So does her authority, inaugurated by miracles, nourished by hope, enlarged by love, established by age. The succession of priests keeps me, beginning from the very seat of the apostolic Peter, to whom the Lord, after his resurrection, gave it in charge to feed his sheep down to the present episcopate." Identity of doctrine, sacraments, and government is preserved by them who have legitimately succeeded to the apostles. It is evident from the institution of the hierarchy, but only the Roman Church can confirm the succession of this type by means of documents. Therefore, in her always has that been preserved, which is the tradition from the apostles by those who are from everywhere. All right. Argument 2, from prescription. Since the Church has Christ as its founder and the apostles as propagators, this was established by Tertullian. That is true what is before. But the Roman Church is anterior to any of the Christian groups, therefore it is apostolic. Proof of the minor. In general, concerning succession, it has been impossible to assign any beginning to the Roman See later than apostolic times. St. Augustine said, all heresies have exited from her. Beautiful statement. The schismatics, however, have erected altar against altar. That's his definition of schism, which could be applied to some. That is, against an older and prior altar. Specifically concerning identity of doctrine, there can never be assigned a time in which the apostolic faith was changed by the Roman Church. It's a very important point. So that ruins recognize and resist. The errors of Macedonius, of Nestorius in the See of Constantinople, the depraved opinions of Dioscorus, of Peter Mongus, what a name, and of others in the See of Alexandria, Arianism, Phocianism, Lutheranism, all have known origins, and when they were cut off, we know. See, so either they were cut off or they proclaimed themselves cut off. But we have no knowledge of the faith of the Roman Church being changed. Therefore, there has been no change in the faith of the Roman Church. See, so this is absolutely essential, because I would say to SSPX is what has come out of Vatican II, the Council itself and its reforms, both doctrinally and liturgically, etc., disciplinary. From the point of view of discipline, does that constitute the Catholic faith? Is that a form of Catholicism? Is it continuous Catholicism or not? All right. If it is a homogeneous continuation of Catholicism, then why are you resisting it? If it is not a homogeneous continuation of Catholicism, then how do you fit into this? Then you have the Roman Church promulgating something that is contrary to faith. You have a defection. There's no way out of that. That's a dilemma. Why are you offering resistance to something that you want to be a part of? Because by becoming or aspiring to becoming part of it, are you not saying that that is a form of Catholicism? Perhaps imperfect, perhaps not as good as it should be, but nonetheless continuous with what went before in principle and in its essentials. Is that not implicit in wanting to be part of it, be sanctioned by it, work with them? No? That's what I would say to them. I mean, what are you aspiring to? Is that the long-term solution, that we have this in this one big house, the imperfect Catholicism and perfect Catholicism? Is that the idea? Is that the future of the Catholic Church? And if it's imperfect Catholicism, it's still Catholicism, why don't you just go along with it? See, and that's essentially the FSSP. See, we have a better liturgy and we have better, it's all better. It's like a Cadillac. It's better. But the other is not bad. That's in principle what they say. I think in their hearts they think it stinks. And I think in their hearts they hate it as much as we do. But they can't say it. See, so that I'm just giving you, based on this, how to argue with them. Give them that dilemma. Is it Catholicism or not? Yes or no? Don't let them in any way diverge from that yes or no answer. It's either is or it isn't. If it is, why are you resisting? Why are you putting up altar against altar? If it is not Catholicism, why do you want to be a part of it? And how can you possibly justify calling that man the Pope when, if you do, you are implicitly asserting the defection of the Catholic Church? So I'm just giving you, just go straight for that point, first of all. Is it Catholicism or not? What are we doing? Why are we doing this? And see, that's something that Archbishop Lefebvre never really made clear. I mean, he made certain statements, but his actions were always to somehow make peace with the modernists. So you got a twofold signal from him. I mean, some of his statements were as clear as a bell that this is not Catholicism at all. But yet you had that constant approach to them as if this was some way we could live with them. So the same argument holds for the identity of the sacraments, especially when one considers that the 7 sacraments and the sacrifice of the Mass are retained in those churches which in the 5th or 6th centuries broke away from the Roman Church, such as the Nestorians, the Jacobites, etc. The Nestorians, though, don't have the consecration, except Ratzinger said, and approved by John Paul II. John Paul II, that it's virtually there. And so the Chaldeans in Iraq could go to the masses of the Nestorians in which there is no consecration. Yes. I wrote an article on it. He said it's virtually there, and you read it. You can look it up in that French Encyclopedia of Liturgy. You can look up the whole text, what they say, and there's a whole article on it. And no, they don't have. How can you have the Holy Eucharist if you don't believe in the unity of person of our Lord? How could that be the flesh of? I mean, if the flesh of Christ is not hypostatically united to the second person of the Blessed Trinity, then what is it? It's a piece of bread. Right? No? But Ratzinger said it's okay for them, if they don't have the Catholic Mass, they can go to the Nestorians. And all it is like a big description of the Last Supper without any words of consecration. You can look it up, yes.
And some people say it just has a very unusual consecration.
That would be like having no money in the bank and saying you have a very unusual bank account. It isn't there. It just isn't there. There is no, this is my body, this is the chalice of my blood. It's just not there. I looked at it. It's not there. No, Ratzinger said it's virtually there. See, the idea is they would like it to be there. It's meant to be there. They just didn't include the words, that's all. But their theology excludes it. You could not possibly believe in the Blessed Sacrament if you're a Nestorian. The same can be said about identity of government. Non-Catholics exhibit only catalogues of rulers who are much more recent than the catalogues of the Roman pontiffs and of many bishops. And so our thing did not come later, but is in fact earlier than all the others. This will be a testimony of truth. So the antiquity of the government of the church, going back to the apostles, is is part of its apostolicity. Tertullian was end of the 2nd century, around there. Objections. The monuments of the first centuries show that the church of those times is quite different from the Roman church. Therefore, the Roman church is not apostolic. Proof of the antecedent. From the simplicity of the primitive church, which had an abhorrence for a multitude of dogmas. Response. I distinguish the antecedent. That this difference is substantial, I deny. Accidental, I concede. See, so the question is are the changes of Vatican II substantial or accidental? Because the church has gone through accidental changes. No one would deny that. The adversaries object both immutability and the changes which they say are very great in the Roman church. But the substance of the church is entirely immutable. In accidental things, however, and with regard to conclusions from principles and in regard to their application, there is a certain progress admitted by Catholics themselves. So we saw that there is a progress in understanding the dogmas. There is also a progress in liturgy. As people contemplate these mysteries, the liturgy grows and is added to very carefully and with approvals and and customs. Things occasionally get taken out that might creep in, like Trent took out a lot of the sequences and suppressed the troping of the Kyrie, for example. Troping means where they put in a little verse after the Kyrie Fons Bonitatis. You see that's fountain of goodness, and so the Kyrie, and then they would sing on the rest of Fons Bonitatis and like that. They took those out, so there's a pruning, just like you would prune a bush. Only in this way is there a difference between the early church and the present state of the church. So what the modernists do is they do not permit to the church the development that is due to the church, such as in liturgical things and certain practices and disciplines. They deny that to the church. They say we got to go back to the early church. But they grant to the church a substantial change in its doctrines, things that cannot change, that they grant. So they have it backwards. And they don't observe the early church, as we know. They don't put the men on one side and the women on the other. All right? They don't draw a curtain at the canon between the men and the women, as they did in the early church. Nor do they draw a curtain around the altar during the canon, as they did in the early church. So even in those churches that face, where the altar, in the sense, faces east, but I mean where it happens to be facing the nave of the church, you couldn't see what was going on anyway in the canon because they drew the curtain around. Those things were considered so sacred that they should not be seen. They don't do that. Nor the saying the canon in a low tone. That is very ancient. See, so I mean that was a lot of garbage and lies that, we're going back to the early church. I heard that when I was a teenager. We're going back to the early church. Yeah, right. Back to the early church. No. Just a lot of garbage. And confusing what was essentially the collection, namely bringing up food and other things that the priests might use at the offertory, then they would have the couple bring up the water and wine as if this was some sort of early church. All right.